Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And the 2042 season is off to a really good start for our Oakland Athletics, a 34-17 record with a 9.5 game lead in the American League West. As we sit here on June 1st, that 34-17 record is also the best record in baseball at this point. So after a good start to the season in the month of April, we had a fantastic month of May, and the plan is coming together the way we drew it up over the off season in terms of how this team is performing. That does not mean everything is going perfectly, though, but some things are moving in a good direction. As Avery Shaham noted in the comments to the last episode, our fan interest is actually recovering a bit this season after some massive hits the past couple of off seasons and then some pretty significant degradation during the seasons, despite us playing very well on the field. We did lower our ticket prices compared to a year ago, which I think hopefully helps on the margin for that. The issue, of course, though, is that we're generating less revenue than a year ago, and we're set to lose about $7.5 million. So definitely going to need a long run in the playoffs if we are to remain profitable with the A's this year. Clearly, we could bump ticket prices up down the line if we decide that the fan interest increases are kind of stalling. But it's all an ecosystem, everything's connected, and we're just trying to balance things out the best we can at this point. Another comment from Avery Shaham, just to talk about. He did like the extension that we gave to the minor leaguer Luis Villarreal. Was less enthusiastic about the recent extension that we signed Juan Ramirez to. I get it. I don't think Ramirez is a superstar player by any stretch of the imagination. But the hope with Ramirez is that we ultimately get a good power-hitting left-handed bat who's durable and going to be in the lineup every day and has a positive influence in the clubhouse, where we might be able to improve his defense and speed in the lab for a very reasonable amount for the next decade or so. It's hard to see this contract turning real bad. Admittedly, it's also hard for me to think it's going to be a great contract, given his limitations, most notably his average-ish contact and his average-ish eye and his probably below-average defense. But I think it could be a very good contract. More importantly, we are going to need some bats several years into the future when you can see over the next few years our expected payroll costs are going to more than double from $129 million this year to $260 million in 3 years. And those are the years when Darnell Selvey is peaking in terms of his arbitration numbers. Arturo Uresti's contract keeps creeping higher. We've got that silly filler for Chisen Iwata that we will get rid of, so don't worry about that, Avery. That's a good point on that one. And then Luis Godina's final arbitration year is also going to come then. Unlikely that we're going to be able to keep all of these players around, and the thought specifically thinking about the left fielder Selvey, the right fielder Uresti, the first baseman Godina, is that Ramirez at a much more palatable number will probably take over in a corner outfield / first base / DH slot for one of those guys as they eventually become too expensive for us to keep around for the long term. So agree, it's unlikely to be an incredible contract, but I think it could be a good contract for us. And given that I ultimately think it's unlikely that our budget is going to be materially higher than $200 million in a few years, I think it's something we kind of have to roll the dice on here with the Oakland Athletics. And both Peter Hooper and Bladestaff commented on our finally connecting with Johnny Neiswanger as part of our organization. Swampy, who we've been looking at long ago, almost a decade at this point, since he was drafted in the second round out of Purdue by the Cardinals, is now a member of our organization, but he's almost 31 years old, fragile physically, and he's put up an ERA close to 7 in Double-A for us at this point, so certainly not thinking he really has a long-term future as a major leaguer. He did suffer that horrible torn rotator cuff that kept him out for 2 full years when he had some setbacks a few years ago in 2038. Can't say that was what ultimately derailed him. You look at who we thought he was when we were scouting him before the draft in 2033. Guy who could potentially have excellent stuff with above average movement and above average control. And the control pretty quickly trended into a less lofty direction. And honestly, when you look at what happened to him with that injury in 2038 when he tore his rotator cuff, pretty much after that, his stuff, his movement, and his control all kind of the same or regressed. He lost a little bit of velocity coming back from that injury, and he's actually lost a little bit more this year. So seems like some of it injury related, some of it age related, some of it just bad luck, and as will happen with most prospects in this game, Swampy Neiswanger unlikely to ever reach his full potential that we thought he had when he was coming out of high school, or in his case, college. And with that, we'll get this episode going. Probably only going to sim into early July in this episode, get to the midway point of the season, and then we'll do our annual mid-year review as we start thinking more seriously about the trade deadline and what we might need to do to keep this competitive, and also start approaching the draft. Looking at the schedule for the month of June here, not a ton of divisional games. We've got 4 at home against the Angels starting tomorrow, 2 on the road against Texas, and then 3 at home against the Mariners in the middle of the month. Other than that, though, a very AL East-centric schedule for us. We've got a home and away series with Baltimore, and then we'll be home for Toronto before going on the road to Boston, Toronto, and the Yankees in what looks like a pretty long road trip at the end of June into July. And we've been playing well here in early June, pushing our record to 40-18 over this first week of the month. Just brought Ernesto Comunez back, but we are going to put him into a long relief spot starter kind of role after he hadn't pitched well in the rotation earlier in the year. Dave Baumler moving from the bullpen back into the rotation after he's pitching a bit better than Comunez. We did send the young left-hander Luis Aguayo, who's having a real rough season, down to AAA for a little more seasoning to make room for Comunez. And we're likely to have another tough decision coming up shortly. Jesus Saldana recently pitched his 3rd rehab game in AAA, went 53 pitches in that game. So the hope is that he'll pitch a 4th game coming up in the next couple of days, hopefully get over 70 pitches in that effort. And if he still looks healthy and well coming out of that, we'll probably bring him back up to the major leagues at that point, which will necessitate a demotion of someone to AAA, and probably with that demotion of somebody else out of the rotation if we think that Saldana is ready to take over a spot back near the top of the rotation where he's been for the last few seasons. And our Oakland A's just continue to play very good baseball at 42-18. Our winning percentage up to 700 at this point, a 12-game lead now on the Rangers. Continue to have players all over the leaderboards. Godina still second in homers, second in ribbies, second in OPS, and third in batter WAR. The young catcher Richards is now basically tied with Tim Grondike of Texas for the lead in batter WAR. Federico Ariola leading the league in ERA, tied for the league lead in wins, third in pitcher WAR. Joe Heilman second in saves. Mike Blumenshine presumably tied for third in wins, although we don't know that from this abbreviated leaderboard for sure. But things going very well. And also some good news on the Jesus Saldana front. Just pitched 67 pitches, so didn't quite get where we hoped he would. But he's now pitched 4 games in AAA, steadily increasing his pitch count, as we can see if we look at his game log here, where he has gone from 26 pitches to 40 to 53 to 67 now. I think I might have said it was 57 before. It was actually 53. Allowed just 7 hits over 10 2/3 innings. He has walked 9 while striking out only 5. So he's actually been below replacement level. His Sierra is almost, or actually more than 5 runs higher than his ERA. So it hasn't been perfect. I think there's certainly maybe a thought to give him one more start. But the most significant issue, and one that I haven't mentioned here, is that although I think he's still a very effective major league pitcher, the reason he's struggled with those pitch counts is that his stamina is just completely gone following that injury. So this is going to be a difficult situation for us. He's not going to go back into the rotation clearly with 25 stamina. You take a look at the scouting report, and his stuff, movement, and control are all kind of what they were. But he had 40 stamina before, which was always kind of borderline for a starter, and he was more of a 5-inning kind of pitcher for us, albeit a very effective 5-inning pitcher for us. And unfortunately, coming off of this major injury, just does not have the ability, it appears by this latest scouting report that we got a few days ago, to really be a starter for us anymore. So that's disappointing, and it's certainly going to make things challenging financially, because he was a bargain for us with the contract we signed him to as a very effective 5-inning starter, as a middle reliever, maybe a potentially stopper, although he is fragile physically, who knows. It's going to be hard for us to be extracting $9, $10, $11, $12 million out of Jesus Saldana over the next few years. And certainly with his potential, his definite exit from the rotation, and I'd have to say, being really realistic, we have to think about his potential exit from the team at some point with the money he's making if he's only going to be a reliever for us. It does make that contract that we signed Luis Villarreal, the young starter who's still in Double-A, even more potentially important for us, because the assumption when we think about our rotation was that Gallick and Weiss could very well be leaving after this year, and Ariola is a pitcher who probably going to be leaving after he goes through his arbitration seasons. So the thought was that with Camunez, Blumenshine, and Saldana, who were all signed to medium to long-term contracts, plus the addition of Villarreal, we had at least 4 spots in the rotation pretty settled for the next several years. And that number very well may now be down to only 3, Blumenshine, Camunez, and Saldana, with the fact that the stamina for Mr. Saldana to remain a starter just does not appear to be there anymore. And unfortunately, you can see that the rest of the league pretty much noticed that Saldana is not necessarily a big-time starter anymore either. We can get some older middling prospects for him, or we can take on a bad contract in the case of Ben Carpenter with Houston. So not necessarily, or a bad contract in Juan Moya with the Yankees. So not necessarily a lot of very attractive options if we do decide that we're going to need to move on from Trey Saldana. Hopefully in the coming months we can turn him into a pretty good reliever for us, but definitely disappointing that a pitcher who was going to be a centerpiece of our rotation for, we hoped, another half decade, that will likely not be the case as he comes back from this pretty significant injury, the torn UCL that's kept him out for the last year, and ultimately means that he has unfortunately likely made his final major league start. Certainly will be back with us shortly, but started the first 145 games of his major league career and was 60-26, two-time All-Star, led the American League in games started 3 straight years, led the league in ERA in his rookie season, had an overall ERA of 3.34, 9.4 strikeouts per 9 inning, 128 ERA plus, 78 FIP minus, average of almost 4 WAR for the 5 seasons that he pitched in the majors, and certainly the average was higher than that when you think about full seasons. So disappointing, but those are the things that happen with the game, and we'll see if hopefully Saldana can support our bullpen this year, and then we'll look to think about where he might fit in this franchise longer term as we approach the trade deadline this year, and then certainly think about it even more seriously in this upcoming offseason if we don't move on from him before the trade deadline this year. And we are going to bring Saldana up now. David Ibarra has been really good for us in ways, but really bad for us in ways. The 3.72 ERA over 9 2/3 innings, certainly not exceptional, but not horrible either. His whip is only 0.83. He's only given up 6 hits in 9 2/3 innings. And he struck out 12 while only walking 2, so those numbers are really strong. But he has given up 3 home runs. Probably gotten just a bit unlucky with that. But he has been below replacement level, and we've got a lot of depth in the pitching staff right now. As we talked about when we brought him up, he's had an ERA of around 5 in AAA over the last end of last year and the beginning of this year, so it's not like he's been lights out at that level. We are going to send him back down to open up a spot in the bullpen for Saldana, and feel real good about the fact that we have got some very interesting pitchers like the lefty Aguayo, who we sent down for Camunez, and the righty Ibarra, who we're sending down for Saldana in AAA. Feel like the pitching depth is really strong this year, particularly in the bullpen. And we're going to put Saldana right into a setup role, demoting Wilson Rangel, who hasn't been great this year, into a middle relief role for us, at least over the near term. And we're also going to bring Bobby Armstrong, the young center fielder, back up. He's only had 1 rehab game in AAA, but he did go 2 for 4 in that game, and he wasn't out that long. Colt Jewell, the 25-year-old, actually hit very well for us, surprisingly well. 326 in his first 43 major league at-bats. Not inconceivable that those will be his only major league at-bats in his career with us, but for a 12th round pick in 2035, did a really nice job for us, helping to fill in against left-handed pitching when Armstrong's been out over the last 6 weeks or so at this point. And we've made it to mid-June, 46-19 record. Just continue rolling, 4 wins in a row now, up 14 games on the Rangers in the division, with Armstrong back in center field and Camunez and Saldana both back, albeit neither in the rotation at this point, which is a little bit surprising. We're pretty much fully healthy at the major league level right now, and clearly playing some of our best baseball ever. Hopefully can continue rolling here over the rest of the month of June into the midway point of the season, and when we start thinking about what we might want to do in the trade deadline a bit more seriously, we'll be making those considerations from a position of strength rather than potential desperation. And another week in the books, and we just continue rolling. We've lost just twice here in the month of July, and we have pushed the winning streak now up to 11 games, opening up an 18.5 game lead in the American League West. Although Milwaukee, with a .643 winning percentage, is having an outstanding season, we are still, looks like 7 games ahead of them in the race for the best record in baseball. So Oakland playing incredibly well here in this 2042 season. And with that great play on the field, we've actually picked up another point in fan interest. So you can see we are steadily selling out at the ticket price that's lower than our average a year ago, about 4% lower than what we averaged. And with the great play on the field, at least slowly clawing things back towards respectability in terms of the interest of the fans in watching our games. So things going really well, and we're a couple of weeks out, probably less than a couple of weeks out from the midway point of the season at 53-19, 72 games into the season. So we're actually a week and a half away after about 10 games. I think the 82nd game of the season is typically when we get our mid-season review from Mr. Fisher on how we've done this year. Certainly going to be upset we let Mendoza go, but I think it's going to be hard for him to complain about the product on the field and the results on the field. And the calendar is turned to the month of July. We actually played, for us, pretty poorly the last week and a half or so of June. After that long winning streak finally ended, we went just 3-4 over the last 7 games of the month. But as we sit here on July 1st, closing in on the midway point, still have a 16.5 game lead in the American League Western Division. Godina's home run pace slowing down a bit. Arturo Uresti now second in the league in ribbies. Godina is third. Jonah Richards second in OPS, and Jonah Richards, the young catcher, now leading the league in batter WAR. Arriola leading the league in ERA, second in wins. Blumenshine third in wins. Heilman still second in saves, and Arriola third in pitcher WAR. So a lot of outstanding seasons for our Oakland A's thus far. And we are going to finally promote the brilliant young pitcher who we signed to that massive extension earlier, even though he's never been above AA. We're going to promote Villarreal, the number 10 prospect in baseball, to AAA right now. 10-2 with a 2.55 ERA and 116 strikeouts in 14 games in AA for us this year, with a ridiculous 4.2 WAR over those 14 games. You might ask us why we kept him down there so long, and it really was that he had much better relationships. He had outstanding relationships with the pitcher, the pitching coach, and the manager in AA. The thought was let him stay down there, try to develop, hopefully get a little bit more out of them, completing another full month down in AA. Not going to have bad relationships with the coaches in AAA, but certainly seemed like the likelihood of a big step forward in AA was somewhat more likely. That being said, he certainly has nothing left to prove at that level. So time to promote him up to AAA, and it's not inconceivable that we'll be seeing Luis Villarreal come September in the majors. Who knows? Could even end up a guy that we want to have on our postseason roster when all is said and done. And fortunately, after that somewhat slow finish to the month of June, won our first 3 games of the month of July on the road at the Yankees. So we have officially now made it to the midway point of the season. Mr. Fisher very excited about our performance on the field. Unhappy that we didn't re-sign Jorge Mendoza. I will say, with the payroll we have and the $200 million budget, and the fact that Mr. Mendoza is making over $30 million a year from the Red Sox, I don't really know how we were going to do that, Mr. Fisher, but just have to suck it up and deal with your incompetence and your lack of intelligence. Looks like Mendoza, actually, at the age of 30, having a pretty disappointing first year in Boston, hitting .241, does have 10 homers, but only an 85 WRC plus and less than a win above replacement. So similar to what happened with the franchise Jake Ortega, maybe we moved on from these guys a season or 2 early, but given our financial constraints, I think it was the right decision to let Mendoza move along. So the lead in the division at this midway point is now 17 and a half games at 59-23. I believe it will be a 5th consecutive AL West title if we win it. Let me just check on that. Actually, yeah, it'll be a 5th consecutive AL West title if we win it this year. So certainly seems like we are in a very good position to make that happen. Thinking about the best record in the American League, and we're 10 games up on the Guardians, so certainly feeling good about our ability to have a first-round bye, home field advantage throughout the American League playoffs, and even with the Brewers having a really good season, looks like we're 8.5 games up on them for the best record in baseball. So as we sit here with just 80 games left to go in this season, barring some crazy injuries or some massive ineffectiveness, certainly would expect that we will once again be a 100-win team, once again win the division, and once again have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. We'll be talking about all of these players on the leaderboard in a bit more depth right now, so it doesn't look like there have been too many changes since the last time we checked in there. Taking a look at the team statistics, we were 14-10 in April, 20-7 in May, and even with those 4 late losses in the month of June, 22-6 in the month of June, and we're undefeated in July. So we just keep getting better every month. Dominant offense, once again, first in the American League in runs scored, and we are in the top 3 in every primary hitting category. Second in the league in steals, first in base running, so good on the base paths as well. Second in defensive efficiency and zone rating, so a very good fielding team. And in addition to being first in runs scored, we're first in runs allowed in the American League. And you can see we are in the top 2 in every pitching category except for home runs allowed, where we're still in the top half of the league, tied for 6th. So despite the massive defections we've had over these past couple of off seasons in terms of letting arbitration eligible players leave via free agency, letting players whose contracts just ran out who were more experienced leave via free agency, and or trading away some veterans who were making significant money and kind of heading into their 30s and likely to deliver less value to us. The performance on the field we have definitely maintained. As we've talked about, we've certainly taken a hit to fan interest from some of those departures, which is a bit disconcerting given that you could argue we're playing better than ever even with the loss of those big players. But things are going really well for our Oakland A's here in 2042. And as I mentioned, we're also fully healthy at this point, which is a nice place to be and not somewhere that we've been with this team literally in over a year of game time at this point due to the significant injuries we had to some of the pitching staff members. Federico Arriola trying to repeat as American League Cy Young Award winner this year, and he's certainly making a strong case for it. 10-3 record with a 2.29 ERA and a 3.2 WAR. His excellent whip of 0.93 is identical to his league-leading figure from a year ago. And he has done a really good job taking over as our number one starter for Saldana over the last year. Heading into his arbitration-eligible seasons, as we've talked about a lot, he's looking for really big money, $26, $27 million a year over 9 years. So I think given our financial limitations, probably still makes sense to just go year to year with him through the arbitration seasons at this point. Doug Weiss could be losing him after this year, but if that is the case, he's going out in style. 7-2 record with a 3.18 ERA for us. And Weiss looking for about $23 million a year over 8 years for those years in his early to mid to late 30s. Given that he is now on the wrong side of 30 and he's fragile physically, I think it's probably the right decision for us to let him move along, but clearly potentially losing our number 2 starter in just a few months is not going to make things any easier as far as continuing to win with this A's franchise. One guy that should be around is the lefty Mike Blumenshine, the first-round draft pick out of Brown from 6 years ago at this point. 8-3 with a 3.40 ERA, 2.1 WAR for him. He has become a good, solid major league starter, and he is actually a guy that we were able to sign to a front-loaded contract that should be delivering us really good value these next few years if he remains healthy. Mike Gallick, unfortunately, another guy that we might be losing. And like Weiss, with Gallick, it could be at the end of this season. 7-3 with a 3.81 ERA. Just great consistency among these top 4 pitchers in our rotation. Gallick looking for $18 million a year over 6 years. So that's going to be tough for us to justify as well, barring a big increase to our budget this coming off season. And then Dave Baumler, who's back in the rotation. Unfortunately, as we talked about, that captain personality for him seems to come and go, so it must just be on the borderline. Not pitching as well since he got back into the rotation for Comunez. Does have a 5-2 record with a 4.80 ERA on the season, but he's been below replacement level. So that number 5 spot in the rotation, with the fact that Saldana is no longer really a starting prospect, and neither Baumler nor Comunez has done a great job in that spot for us this year, is still definitely open. The thought is certainly that come playoff time, we hope that Villarreal might be in the mix. Not that we'll need a 5th starter in the playoffs, but not necessarily thinking we're going to go for a starter just because we like the top 4 so much, and with Baumler and Comunez, we do have bodies that we can put out there in the 5th starter spot, even if they're not particularly effective. We are 59-23 when all is said and done, so even though the number 5 hole in the rotation has been a bit problematic this year, it certainly isn't keeping us from winning. Comunez, who we've been talking about, started 9 games for us, came back from his injury, and he's now pitched 3 games in the bullpen since then. 2-3 with a 5.79 ERA. He's actually been a bit above replacement level. He may end up taking that spot back from Baumler. Looking at some middle relievers, Eric Keach, the young right-hander, a 2.45 ERA, more than a strikeout per inning for us. He was a all-star in his rookie season a year ago and remains a productive member of our bullpen. The lefty Bobby Surgener, who we traded for with the Twins last offseason, a 2.27 ERA over 35 and 2/3 innings. Has given up 4 home runs, but his whip of 0.87, very strong. And another lefty, Wilson Rangel, IAFA signing, who's come up through our organization, has an ERA of just under 4 in 38 and 2/3 innings, but he's definitely been above replacement level as well. So the middle relievers doing well. The setup guys as well, having nice seasons. Kevin Carmichael, a 2.23 ERA over 32 and a third innings. You may remember he ended up in the rotation in the second half of last year. And certainly if we decide that neither Comunez nor Baumler is doing the job that we want in the 5-hole, could certainly put Carmichael back into the rotation in the second half of the season. Jonathan Shearer, the 28-year-old, having an outstanding year for us, a 1.88 ERA, 11.7 strikeouts per 9 innings, and a WAR of over 1, despite pitching just 38 and a third innings for us. Saldana has not been good since he came back. 11 hits allowed, including a home run over 8 and 2/3 innings. Fortunately, not having to pitch as long as we were trying when we were hoping maybe the stamina would still be there when he was on his rehab assignments, not walking nearly as many batters in the majors as he was down in the minors. That being said, still has a 7.27 ERA, but it's a small sample size of 8 and 2/3 innings, and he's also allowed a 4.17 BABIP. His Sierra in FIP minus indicate that he's pitching a lot better than some of the other numbers indicate. He's also been above replacement level, although $9 million for a setup man is not a sustainable number for these athletics for the medium to long term. Still going to hope that perhaps he can get a third World Series title with us this season before we maybe have to make some difficult decisions on Saldana next offseason. And the young closer, Joe Heilman, taking over that role for us this year, a 3.19 ERA, but he's been pretty darn effective. Has walked more batters than we would have hoped with 20 walks in just 36 and 2/3 innings. But 22 shutdowns to 5 meltdowns is a pretty solid ratio. Does have 25 saves, and he's striking out 10.8 batters per 9 innings. Hopefully we'll get the walks under control. He did walk just 16 batters in twice as many innings as he's pitched this year, a year ago. So, and when we look at his control, he's not necessarily Greg Maddux as far as his control, but certainly think that 20 walks in 36 and 2/3 innings is an aberration for Heilman, and would expect more from him going forward. So when I think about the weaknesses on this team, arguably it's the 5th starter, but with Baumler, Comunez, and Carmichael, feel like we've got options on the team that could certainly fill that role. And when we think about the talent that we have in AAA right now with Chad Evans, who's coming back from an injury, the fact that we've demoted Luis Aguayo, we just promoted Luis Villarreal to that level. And then we also have the young flamethrower in AAA as well, in Mr. Ibarra. Feel like there is a lot of potential help for our pitching staff down in AAA. Don't necessarily think we're going to need to do too much of anything as we approach the trade deadline. That being said, we'll still check in on who happens to be on the trade block at this point. It doesn't necessarily look like there's a big list of pitchers quite yet. Certainly Cole Lawrence, closer for the Padres, looks like a guy who could help us, but again, making almost $10 million. He is an established closer who's led the NL in saves the last couple of seasons. Certainly could be additive to the bullpen, but don't necessarily think it's necessary that we chase after somebody like him. Haven't even gone through our hitters yet. but we'll take a quick preview here at the batters that are on the trade block. Several catchers highlighting the list. Our old catcher Byron Brain, who looks like he is now kind of in more of a platoon role with the Miami organization, hitting just a $124 and continuing to strike out in more than half of his at-bats. Don't necessarily think he's the answer. And as good as Alfredo Magana has been over the course of his career, and he remains productive for Texas this year with a 118 WRC plus, making a lot of money and a pretty negative influence in the clubhouse. So given that we've got the guy who's leading the American League in WAR behind the plate right now, don't think that bringing Magana on board is necessarily something that we will need to be thinking about seriously. Some familiar names, though, other than Brain and Magana on the trade block. Jake Bowers, who was our first baseman for a few seasons and remains a productive, albeit not exceptional, major league hitter, is with Texas now, and he's also on the trade block. Frank Itzturis, a guy who we've thought about in free agency and the trade market over the years, also out there, but with the number one offense in the American League, don't necessarily think that there's going to be a ton of changes we need to make there as we approach the trade deadline either. And getting into those position players, our new backup catcher who we traded for this past offseason, Ron Markley, kind of a productive backup catcher, hitting 240, does have a homer and 50 at-bats. 93 WRC plus, almost half a win above replacement, despite starting just 16 games for us. Doing a fine job as a backup catcher. I don't think we can really hope for too much more than that. And given that we've got a fantastic guy as our starting catcher, don't think we really even necessarily need much more than that. Jonah Richards, as we've talked about, not playing quite as much as he did when he was primarily a designated hitter for us a year ago, but still incredibly productive when he is in the lineup, hitting 336, 16 doubles, 14 homers, and 238 at-bats. A ridiculous 175 WRC plus. And amazingly, in the first half of the year, his 4.6 WAR matches what he did in his monster rookie season that won him the Rookie of the Year a year ago. Obviously, we're getting a lot of value from his very good catching defense that we weren't giving a year ago when we had Mendoza primarily playing behind the plate for us. But Richards, as a guy that we did get locked up for 10 years and $144 million, likely will be the highest paid player on our team a few years from now, but certainly appears to be deserving of that at this point. Guy that we don't have locked up, but that is deserving of everything that he's going to get paid down the line, likely by someone else, is Luis Godina, hitting 311, 18 homers, 67 ribbies, a 3 WAR on the season for the young first baseman who we've had some tremendous success in the development lab with over the last few years. Chris Lance has been up, only started 12 games for us, more of a pinch hitter off the bench, although he's only played 19 games overall, so not getting a ton of action there. Does have a homer in 50 at-bats, 75 WRC plus, been a little below replacement level. As a guy coming off the bench, he's a pretty good hitter against right-handed pitching. The issue is just that our lineup is so loaded that he still doesn't really even get too many pinch hitting opportunities with this mighty Oakland A's squad. I'd say the position that caused me the most thought and consternation and potential concern as we began this season was second base. We've moved on from Andy Toribio a couple of years ago, and then Alejandro Landin this past off season, who had been our second baseman and shortstop for over half a decade together, and decided to go with the platoon of Amari Alcindor and Phil Swenson. It's been okay, but certainly not great. Alcindor hitting just 228 in 136 at bats, making $5 million this year. His contract is going to continue increasing. I don't think it's an untradeable contract, so we may have to get out of it. Wanted to give him one last chance this year to kind of prove he could be an everyday player in the majors, and unfortunately hasn't proved that for us this year after being an above-average offensive player a couple years in a row, just a 82 WRC plus this year. Swenson has been playing against left-handed pitching, and he's actually been playing shortstop against left-handed pitching, and we faced a lot of lefties this year. Batting average just 242, 83 WRC plus, so he's been in the same neighborhood in terms of his overall offensive production as Amari Alcindor. Been a little more valuable, I think, thanks to his glove at shortstop. So I can't say it's great with Alcindor and Swenson at second base / shortstop, but I also can't say it's horrible. If that's the weakest link in our lineup and we're a 59-23 team, it's hard to argue that it's going horribly wrong. That being said, finding a fourth infielder to be a starter for us over the next few years, along with Godina at first, Iwata at short or second, and Pimentel at third, is probably something we're going to need to get right in the coming months and certainly in this coming off season. If there's an opportunity to find a big-time middle infielder who can help us win this year, I think it's certainly something that we would continue to think about. Amari Flagler is a really nice defensive middle infielder, but a very average bat, the definition of an average bat. And when you look at the WRC pluses he's put up in recent years, probably not as effective offensively as either Alcindor or Swenson have been for us this year. So we'll continue to investigate things. It's certainly the most obvious hole on our roster at this point in terms of our everyday players. But again, I don't think it's a disastrous situation. Juan Pimentel at third base, having a down year by his standards, hitting 275, 15 homers, and 57 ribbies. But he doesn't walk a lot, only 11 walks in 77 games played, and just barely an above-average offensive player this year. Still put up a 1.4 WAR for us, but Pimentel is a guy who we did sign to a long-term contract, and is going to be making some legit money going forward. And unfortunately, the former 2040 AL Most Valuable Player has been trending in a negative direction since his rookie season, with his WRC pluses going from 163 as Rookie of the Year to 143 in his MVP season to 117 last year to just a 101 this year. That said, looking at his ratings, 70 contact, 65 home run power, outstanding speed, good gap power, I think he's probably gotten a bit unlucky this year. 284 BABIP kind of indicates that could be the case a little bit, and expect that the durable young third baseman should be even better for us over the second half of the year. And last but not least, Chisin Iwata, playing shortstop against righties, second base against lefties, hitting 265 this year and 310 at-bats, but does have 16 doubles and 5 triples to go with 7 homers. Also stolen 19 bases, which is as many as he did a year ago when he did miss some significant time due to injury. 113 WRC plus and a 2.3 WAR. Certainly not a vintage year for Iwata, who was the Rookie of the Year in 2040. but nothing to complain about from him either. So thinking about the catchers in the infield, whether we want to do something at second base is kind of the only thing I think we need to seriously think about as we close in on the trade deadline. And we'll turn now to our outfield. Darnell Selvey, the left fielder. Another guy having, for him, a down year, but still a pretty productive offensive player. 263 average, 18 doubles, 9 homers, scored 54 runs. Overall has put up a 118 WRC plus and a 2 WAR for us, but compared to what we've gotten used to seeing from Selvey, can't argue that that's not a down season. Looking at his ratings, looking at his history, though, certainly not someone that we would think seriously about moving out of the starting lineup. In right field, Arturo Uresti having a big year for us. 255 batting average, but does have 15 homers and 68 ribbies. Those 68 ribbies, one of the top numbers in the American League. 119 WRC plus, a 2.3 WAR. Uresti just doing what Uresti always kind of does. Goes out and hits in the 250s with a lot of pop in the bat. Draws a lot of walks. Plays Gold Glove caliber right field. And ultimately delivers a pretty productive season for us. Jesus Aguiar, our backup center fielder, although he's got a little more playing time than we would have expected because Bobby Armstrong was on the IL for about a month and a half, hitting 273 and 132 at-bats, does have 10 doubles, 5 for 5 trying to steal bases. Been a league average offensive player, put up a WAR of over 1, which in his limited playing time is pretty good. A very useful guy to have as a fourth outfielder. He can play a competent center field and a really good left or right. He's got some speed, gives us a left-handed hitter we can use off the bench or put in the lineup against right-handed pitching. Bobby Armstrong back from his injury. It's been a bit of a fractured season for him, only been back for about a week at this point. The batting average on the year, only 212 with a 65 WRC plus. Still has been above replacement level, largely thanks to his 10 steals and some good range in the outfield. Looking at his ratings, another guy that we would expect will be more productive over the second half of the season, given that we have made a front-loaded, long-term commitment to Mr. Armstrong. Certainly going to give him every chance possible to remain our starting center fielder. And then the youngster, Juan Ramirez, who's our DH this year, having a pretty productive rookie year. You may remember we talked about at the top of the episode, signed him to a 10-year, $35.5 million deal before this season got underway. And thus far, he's kind of delivering on everything we could hope for a guy who's making his major league debut. Batting .263, but he does have 19 homers and 59 ribbies in his first 304 major league at-bats, putting up a 113 WRC plus for us. Playing primarily DH, so unfortunately his WAR is not going to be huge because he's not doing much of anything for us defensively. Has played 5 games in right field where he's basically been the definition of a average right fielder, although his range rating perhaps a little lower than average. But Ramirez, Big Thunder, is following up that 68 home run, 155 RBI season in AAA with a productive and very cost-effective, making the major league minimum this year, introduction to the major leagues for us. So as we think about this team heading into the trade deadline, feeling pretty good about what we've done. As we talked about, we got the best record in baseball, no injuries at the major league level, and the team is first in the league in runs scored, first in the league in runs against, and we arguably have some pretty good established major leaguers who are having down years where we would expect some reversion towards the mean to be positive for us over the second half of the year. So don't think we need to do anything desperate. If there's a brilliant starting pitcher we can rent to add into the rotation, we'd certainly think about doing that. If there's a brilliant center fielder we could rent, although I think we're still committed to Armstrong for the medium term. If there was a great center fielder out there that we could rent for a couple months, given that we're a win now team, I'd think about that. And could certainly say the same thing and probably say it stronger at second base, where Alcindor and Swenson have not been a train wreck, but have certainly not been all that helpful in terms of us winning a lot of games either. You can see after a decent start to the season in the month of April, where we went 14-10, this team has absolutely taken off while everyone else in the American League West is kind of treading water or moving in the wrong direction. And we do have that massive 17.5 game lead as we sit here on 4th of July, 2042. And with that, we will call it an episode. Next time around, we're going to sim ahead just about a week and get to the amateur draft and take a look at who may be available for us as we have gotten very accustomed to. We will be picking last 35th pick in the first round this year. But looking at the draft order, we do have the second supplemental pick, which will be 37th overall because of the departure of the catcher Jorge Mendoza. So we won't be picking until number 35, but when we are on the clock in next episode, we're going to have 2 of the next 3 picks, and we will certainly let the Worldwide Scouting Department share their thoughts on what we perhaps might want to do with those 2 picks. But that is next episode's business. At this point, we are happy with how the season is going, and we'll find out what kind of progress we make over the next week, next time around. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.